as a scientist and a theorist, I frequently encounter people who will tell me that, they will say with a glimmer in their eye that the plural of anecdote is not data, yes. Right? Now, I also know that at some level, the word anecdote is misused by people. It's used effectively to dismiss a piece of evidence rather than allow it to be integrated at a natural level. And it is certainly the case that a single anecdote is not a pattern in and of itself, but it is a kind of evidence. And the trick, the way one figures out whether there is a pattern, does initially involve looking at anecdotes. You can't look at data because data only exists after you have set out to collect it. Right. What causes you to set out to collect it are patterns that one informally notices, which actually are the first step in the scientific method. Observation involves looking at patterns and saying, I wonder why this is true. Here's a possible explanation. And if this possible explanation was correct, these other things would be true. And then I can go look for those other things and see if they are in fact present, right? Observation, hypothesis, prediction, test. That's the method. So when people say they roll their eyes at the idea that an anecdote has caught your attention, what they are really doing is interrupting the first step in the scientific method. And I would point out that, yes, it is true that it is preferable when one has anecdotes that are suggestive of a pattern, right? Anecdotes, say, people collected in a Facebook group reporting symptoms that are not identical but are suggestive of some sort of underlying pathology, that should cause rigorous tests to be done. That's what one wants to happen. But when there is resistance to running those tests, when there is resistance to analyzing the evidence that has accumulated, then we are left with the anecdotes, not by choice, but that's simply what is present for us to evaluate. And so there's something, I would say, diabolical about claiming that something is safe and then ignoring evidence that it might not be so safe, and then chastising those who are looking at the evidence that exists, the anecdotes, and saying you don't have a right to do that because anecdotes aren't science, right? That's all nonsense. Right. Have I misdescribed any of this?
No, I think that's accurate. I mean, I think it was Charles Sanders Peirce who said, do not block the course of inquiry. And that's what's happening here is the course of inquiry is being blocked. Actually, there have been quite a number of published case studies. And so this is interesting because high-level medical journals do publish single case studies or a case study of 3 individuals or 7 individuals or that kind of thing. I could send you links to published case studies of apparent severe adverse events after these COVID vaccines, some of them neurological in nature. So it isn't even true to say that no respectable journal will publish something except for a large, blinded trial or something like that. That's not true. They publish case studies all the time. And then after the case studies come in, then they might go out and gather more. Another thing that I would want to mention would be that testimony is always going to be important. Even if a scientist does a study, you're going to be dependent on the scientist's testimony. If he could lie, there is such a thing as scientific fraud. So ultimately, we're going to be dependent on testimony unless you want to get deeper down to, sense data or something really underlying. But, testimony is at a pretty fundamental level epistemologically. Moreover, when you do even larger scientific studies, you're going to be using to some extent anecdotal information as far as does the patient say that this symptom has resolved? I've been reading a lot more scientific papers than I ever, had before, medical papers in researching this. And you'll find, the researchers will say, okay, that the patient said that they had experienced such and such many patients said they experienced such and such degree of resolution in their pain for whatever the medication might be, to find out if a medication is effective. So they're taking the word for it of those patients and recording it. So in that sense, anecdotes are feeding into scientific investigation, even the most formal kind of scientific investigation at multiple different levels.
Yes, it's absolutely maddening to me as somebody who practices science that we would dismiss anecdote, right? If I don't have those anecdotal patterns to work from in order to figure out what hypothesis might be worth testing, then there's no way to start. And it occurs to me, even just talking to you right now, that we have medicine functioning at different levels, right? We have public health and we have, official guidance on what drugs work on which conditions and things like this. But the practice of medicine that takes place in a doctor's office is in fact supposed to be about the doctor's ability to work from anecdote and figure out what it suggests about what you likely have, what things tend to work for people who have similar types of diseases. Doctors are actually supposed to test hypotheses at a level that isn't formal. Right? They're supposed to say, well, gee, that sounds like you might have a problem, a generalized inflammation problem. If they're a good doctor, they might say, let's figure out what's causing the inflammation. A regular doctor might say, let's treat the inflammation, But in any case, the point is, doctors are not running studies on large numbers of patients in general. They are working with individuals whose presentation is individual by its very nature. And when they do it right, they end up alleviating symptoms and treating disorders in a way that's effective. So at some level, I feel like we are being fed epistemological nonsense so that we will not be able to recognize a pattern that is obvious in front of us.
Yes. Well, and the doctor himself might then use induction. Doctors will say to me, I had a patient who, I don't know how many times you've heard a doctor say that. Oh, yeah, I've had patients who, I had a patient who. And so then that will lead a doctor to maybe use a medication more often because it's worked on his patients. So doctors are doing informal science like that all the time and just in their own practices.
Absolutely. And I would also, I think I mentioned it earlier, but we also have systems set up so that we are not left with anecdotal evidence. We have the VAERS system in the US, for example, which is supposed to capture adverse events following vaccination. And should there be a pattern, doesn't mean that every instance that shows up in the VAERS system will be caused by a vaccine. But if we simply record every time somebody has had a serious medical incident in close proximity to a vaccination event, if we collect all of that evidence, we'll be able to say, hey, look, if there was nothing with these vaccines, then the rate at which people have, let's say, a heart attack following this vaccination shouldn't be any different than the rate at which they have a heart attack following the flu vaccine. And if the rate is 10 times, 50 times higher, then you say, well, I wonder why these two groups of people who got a vaccination and then went home and had their event, why are these two groups so different? Right. So what I'm constantly told is that the VAERS system is unreliable, and therefore that the huge spike in adverse events following the COVID vaccines is not meaningful. But nobody seems to know what that implies. They seem to think that implies that these things are safe, which it doesn't. At best, it implies that we don't know how safe they are.
And it is odd that they suddenly decided that it was unreliable this year. It was strangely reliable through 2020, through 2019, let's say through flu season. Pre-COVID, the VAERS system was considered reliable. And oddly enough, when 2021 came around and we rolled out the COVID-19 vaccines, it became abruptly unreliable. I don't know how that happened. Or to put it differently, previously it was regarded, if anything, as needing to be multiplied by a multiplying factor. So if it was unreliable in any way, it was by under-reporting rather than by over-reporting. Now suddenly we're supposed to believe it's vastly over-reported, and I don't know why we should be so confident of that.
Right. We can't possibly be confident of that. But I guess I would say, again, I don't want to give the benefit of the doubt because I don't believe it is a reasonable doubt. But if we bend over backwards to grant everything that those who claim these vaccines are safe want us to believe, at best, we've got a system that doesn't tell us how safe they are. It certainly doesn't tell us that there's no problem.
That they are safe. Right. And let me also add that the pop-up you get on Facebook or any of these other places will say, and are continuing to be monitored for safety. So it won't just say that they're safe. It'll say, and they're being carefully monitored. And I'm going, where is this happening? Where is this continuing monitoring happening if not through VAERS? Is there some secret system that they're using to being continually monitoring? No, obviously the VAERS system was supposed to be that system.
Right.
And so that part of it should be deleted in any event if they're now going to say that that system has no monitoring capability because it's wildly unreliable.
The other place you could monitor it is you could continue to monitor the level of events in the control group of the initial safety trial versus the treatment group, but they didn't allow that either. My understanding is that they treated everybody after the short initial test period. So there is no remaining control group. So again, we have a system that for whatever reason is incapable of delivering us a signal that these vaccines are dangerous, even if they are. And so what we are left with is a world of anecdotes that we are told we must ignore, which epistemologically does not make any sense. And it must be driving you crazy as an epistemologist to be in the group that is held at the level of anecdote and then to watch the conversation continue as if nothing abnormal is taking place.
Right. And then when you would be willing to be studied, and you're not being contacted to be studied. I mean, not just me, but others would make our medical information. If someone wanted to do like a retrospective study or something like that, it's like, fine. If you would like to turn us into data, we are only too happy to be turned into data. And there's so far quite a lack of interest in that.
So to fill that in, and I think most people probably will figure it out on their own, but were you to find yourself in this group, you have taken a vaccine, something has happened to your life. You discover there are many others. You don't know whether you're stuck with these symptoms permanently, whether they will clear up on their own, whether you're stuck with them except if a treatment is found, and hopefully it will be. And so, of course, you want to be studied. Right. The amount of good that would come from understanding what has happened to you is potentially huge, and the benefit of it would go to you. So there's no mystery that there are lots of people waiting to have somebody say, all right, I'm sick of being an anecdote. Let's turn me into data, figure out what's going on so we can help the others who have the same condition.
Right.
And yet it doesn't happen.